Today is May 4th, 2023. My name is Kevin, and Ian's also joining us. We're both interns at the archive. And we'll be talking today with Mr. Nicholas Hill. He's a talented percussionist. He has a bunch of awesome, diverse experiences in music. So thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So to start off, we'd like to ask a few questions about your early life. So tell me about your experience growing up here in Houston. Did you like it here?
Yeah, I actually when I was younger, I think I guess when you're really young, you don't really necessarily think about where you are, what the environment is like. The most important things around you are more than likely your parents and siblings. So growing up as a very very young child, I don't have any memories early on of having any distaste for Houston. I think when you get a little older, you start to kind of feel that the place is known and that you would like to explore new things. But then, honestly, one of the bigger things that happened to me actually was attending Rice, and for the first time ever, meeting a lot of individuals from all over the country and in some cases all over the world. And at that point, I actually became probably one of the most staunch defenders of Houston, and I was always repping the city and trying to explain to everyone that it might take some getting used to, but it's truly like a really excellent place to be.
So you come from a musical family. So how would you kind of describe your household growing up here and kind of the neighborhood you grew up as well?
Neighborhood was quiet. It was not exactly suburban, but about as close to it as you can probably get while still being, around the 610 loop. There was not a lot of children in the neighborhood, maybe only a couple of other kids, but my brother and I used to, obviously go out and play with them. A little bit older, so that was still back when we would strap on our rollerblades and go play street hockey every afternoon on Saturdays. As far as like the household itself, the musical surroundings, my parents were both musicians. My dad was especially a very dedicated musician for a very long time. A phenomenal guitar player, composer. He was in a band actually, I think at Rice. It was technically a Rice band, but they were, maybe not my taste in music these days, but they put out some really great stuff. And we still talk about it to this day. My mom, on the other hand, a little bit less focused on music. She was definitely more of a visual artist, but she played piano. When I was young, she played piano, and there was always at least a piano and a few guitars around the house. And I remember just growing up and hearing her practicing piano and my dad playing guitar. And from a really, really young age, my brother, was clearly drawn to music. He studied piano when he was younger, but he really, I think, found a fondness for vocals. So he started singing, and at some point, I think he took some vocal training lessons, but he was in choirs, in the local groups, schools, and stuff. And between the three of them, I was just constantly surrounded by people playing and practicing and making making the world a better place, I guess.
Yeah. I just talked to your brother, and he was telling me about some of his musical experiences. So you're a multi-instrumentalist. You know how to play multiple instruments. So you first learned how to play the piano, and then you play the cello, and then now you're like percussion mainly. So can you tell me more about this kind of progression in your journey from one instrument to the other?
Yeah, it's honestly, it's not a crazy story or anything. I think piano as a child, it was one of those cases where the rule in the family is you have to play an instrument, and let's start with piano. And piano, honestly, like I was way too young at the time to really appreciate it, but piano makes a lot of sense as a foundational musical instrument. It is an extremely difficult instrument to learn how to play, I think, and I'm not good at it by any means, but it does give you a lot of foundational knowledge. I mean, it is technically a percussion instrument, but it, obviously is also a melodic instrument. In terms of the theory of playing music, it's kind of cool how it literally lays the entire scale out in front of you. And I think, honestly, I think for anyone who wants to be a musician, learning at least a little bit of piano is basically a necessity. Um, I don't, I was very, very young when I stopped playing piano, and I couldn't tell you exactly why. It might have been like a teacher I had moved on, or maybe I just complained about having lessons often enough that my parents finally caved in. But eventually, when I was in elementary school, there was a choice essentially that was given. It was kind of an elective period, and they said, you can either join the school's orchestra, or you can take an art class, like a visual arts class. So at the time, I mean, I was still interested in the idea of music. So I decided to go for the orchestra. Again, too young, couldn't tell you how I came to choose cello, but I chose cello. I think maybe I just was drawn to the sound of it. They sound really beautiful still. I mean, that honestly didn't last very long. I probably only played cello for maybe 2 or 3 years. Again, was never very good at it. I think my brain just doesn't, at least, especially at the time, my brain just did not kind of comprehend the melodic side of music so much. I was much better at keeping rhythm. So at some point, the choice came up again. I think I was changing grades or maybe going into middle school, but the choice came up again. Do you want to do music, or do you want to use this elective period to pursue visual art? And again, my mom being a visual artist, that was also a large part of my upbringing. I was constantly surrounded by art and sculpture, design, just, any kind of visual or any kind of like visual or architectural aesthetic was ever present in my upbringing. So anyway, at that point, basically, I had the choice to make again, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give visual arts a try. So I stopped going to the school's orchestra and started taking art classes. And I thought to myself that would be the end of it, but going home one day, my mom kind of took me aside and she was like, that's great. I'm super happy for you. I love art. I'm glad you want to pursue art, but you still have to play an instrument. And so at that time, I didn't own a cello. Like the family didn't own a cello. We had been renting it from the school for practice and whatnot. So I was kind of being cheeky. I thought I was being really clever, and I asked them, what about drums? Like, if you want me to play an instrument, let's just go for the most rock and roll instrument you can think of. And honestly, they maybe were calling my bluff, but they said yes. So I signed up for some drum lessons, got a practice pad. Not long after that, got an actual drum set. And it was just, it was like world changing for me, for like in a musical perspective. It's something that really connected to me at like a deep core level, where something like piano and cello just didn't. I guess, again, maybe too young, too immature or something, but I didn't have the abstract capability to appreciate or focus on learning, piano or cello, but playing drums, like knowing how to hit some stuff and make loud noises and a lot of noise and all the time, came pretty naturally to me. And I think there's a large part of it that, frankly, drums are, and I know most drummers would say this, they're like a really good way to release energy. Any negative feelings or aggression you've been feeling, it's just so easy to just hit it out on a drum set. So I ended up, playing a lot of drums. Basically, I'd get home from school and I would play for at least an hour or 2 hours, and nobody had to tell me to. Honestly, more often than not, people asked me to be quiet or stop playing drums. But yeah, when you play that much of any single instrument, you definitely start to learn some things and gain a little expertise in it. And yeah, I just honestly, I never really looked back from there.
Mm-hmm. So I know you mentioned that, and learning the drums kind of initially was this sort of like it started from this like cheeky response. But were you interested in, I guess, like music that drawed upon drums or percussion, heavily drew upon drums or percussion before, or you know?
I mean, the answer is it's definitely a little more nuanced than just yes, but the easy answer is yes. Like any, I think I was about 12 years old when I started playing the drums. Like any 12-year-old, I wasn't kicking back and listening to classical music to relax. I grew up listening to all kinds of music, again, a musical family, but when I was really little, I loved the oldies. Back when Houston had a dedicated oldies radio station, that's the only station I cared to listen to. We're talking like old oldies, like 50s and 60s music. And that, I think in a historical context, that's when really percussive music started to become pop music, and it's what people were listening to. Drum set was, obviously they used drum set before that, but I think drum set started to get this kind of rock and roll persona associated with it. And, by the time I was being asked to choose another instrument, around 12, I was already getting into rock music. A little bit of heavy metal, all extremely percussion driven kinds of music, very rhythmic. And yeah, it definitely was a lot of that kind of drove me to playing drums.
So you had a lot of like musical interests. Did you have any, favorite artists or, music groups that you idolize or kind of looked up to?
Oh, I mean, I wouldn't even know where to start. There's so many of them. When I was really little, I was really into the Beatles. I was really into big bands like trying to remember the names of some of these guys. So I don't know how much either of you know about drums, but there's a style of drum playing that is called double bass. So the drummers will set up two physical bass drums, but that actually started with some swing bands back in the 30s, I think, way before heavy metal took over it. So yeah, I liked a lot of these guys. I mean, let me try and remember some of the names here.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not worth our time for me to look through and try and figure it out. But yeah, big bands, swing bands. We're talking the song "Sing Sing Sing," the one that goes like those songs really resonated with me when I was super, super young. I remember pulling out my dad's vinyl records of some of these old jazz artists and just listening to them on repeat, essentially. Outside of that, the Beatles were huge for me. The Beach Boys a little less so, and some really kind of old R&B, soul music. There's one that always comes to mind, and I still sometimes will listen to this track just for a shot of nostalgia, but Lil Eva's Do the Locomotion, or I think it may be just called The Locomotion. A lot of those songs were super important to me when I was a child. By the time I was learning to play drums, like I said, I was already getting into rock and a little bit of heavy metal. So the bands at the time that I liked were it was mostly whatever, the pop rock station was playing on the radio, but I was also starting to explore some more extreme styles of music at the time. So like System of a Down, I think, was an early adoption for me. That was a band that I did start listening to right around the time I was 12, probably right around the time I started playing drums. But they were extremely special to me in that, the instant I heard them, I was like, wow, this is different and this is cool. It's edgy. It got some kind of almost hard to pinpoint sophistication to it that I hadn't heard in other music. And, being an angsty kid, it was also aggressive, and it gave me a new perspective on the kind of music that I was open to hearing. And yeah, I mean, that's that led to a whole lot of other artists later down the line that I've grown to love. But yeah, I would say probably they if any one group was the most influential in my musical upbringing, it was probably them. I don't spend a lot of time listening to them today, but like I said, they really did kind of change what I was open to hearing.
Gotcha. And can you tell us more about how you kind of got good at percussion then? Like, did you have some notable teachers? I don't know, specific resources you used, some notable experiences?
So I had a few, I actually only had, I want to say, two kind of formal teachers. One of them was, I'm sorry, I can't remember either of their names already, but essentially he was kind of, I forget where we even found him. And Mars Music used to be a store in Houston. I want to say that we found him through Mars Music, maybe one of those like phone tab sheet kind of things that people would post up outside of music stores. But I took lessons from him for several months, not super long, but then the store actually closed and we didn't have a way to contact him. So I stopped taking lessons at that point from him. He was really cool. I mean, he was obviously older than me, but he was into a lot of the same kinds of music that I was starting to explore, a lot of heavier music, more extreme styles of music. And he was super excited to, I think, kind of teach this young moldable mind about how to play extreme drums, which was, way beyond my skill set at the time. So we lost contact with him, and I think I stopped taking lessons for a while, but a friend of my brother's, and actually the drummer in his band in high school, recommended another woman to me who was teaching at the Houston Baptist University, I believe. And I signed up to take lessons with her, and it was for an even shorter time. I probably only went to her less than a dozen times. But she gave me, I think, a lot of keys to, what, not necessarily like even techniques, more like ideas about how to become a better drummer. And I remember specifically one of them, the first teacher, the guy that I had met through Mars Music, he said, this is how you do a double stroke roll. It's right, left, right, left. And you just play it really fast. And, I was terrible at it. And he more or less said, you'll get better at it over time. You just have to keep trying. And she asked me one day, she basically, it was probably maybe my first or second or third lesson with her, and she essentially sat me down and she's like, we're going to go through your rudiments to see where you are, what your skill level is like. And she got to the double stroke roll and she said, play it. And her jaw kind of dropped a little bit. And she's like, that, she didn't say that was terrible, but her face said that was not good. And she was like, who were you going to before this? And I named the teacher. I remember that. I have a very vivid memory of this. I named my teacher, and she said, oh, him? I used to teach him. What did he tell you? And I said, well, we said, it's right, right, left, left, right, right, left, left, and just practice it and practice it fast and you'll get better over time. And she was just like, no, don't listen to that. Practice it slow and be really deliberate. She's like, you have to practice. You don't just get better over time. You have to practice it and like methodically. And that was honestly probably the single greatest lesson I ever learned when it comes to how to practice an instrument or get better at an instrument. She only taught me, like I said, probably a dozen or fewer times. And then for whatever reason, again, couldn't remember, but I stopped going to her and basically would just play on my own. And yeah, I mean, a lot of it was beyond the play deliberately and play deliberately and practice methodically. There was a lot of experimentation. Like for me, the first time I before I even could have told you what a syncopated rhythm was, I heard some of my favorite drummers doing it. People like, people like John Dolmain from System of a Down or Ed Cunningham from the Deftones. They would play these. They're not complicated beats, but they have like interesting syncopation that would definitely be difficult for a beginner drummer, which I was. And I heard it and I knew what it sounded like and I could roughly sing it back, but coordinating my limbs to make it happen on a drum set was impossible for me. And at that point, it became let me keep trying, let me just keep trying. Like I roughly know, I know how it's supposed to sound. And the only challenge is getting my feet and my hands to move in the right way to reproduce it. And eventually you land on it once, right? And once you get it right once, you know that you can get it right again. It wasn't necessarily an accident. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it really was, at the end of the day, just keep trying and you'll get better. Even though there really does need to be some kind of method to it.
Mm-hmm. So once you got better, improved, you learned more, what was kind of the first band or music group you ever joined or participated in or made?
So that's actually like a really funny question to me because one of the questions you didn't ask, which I honestly kind of thought you might, was like, why drums, why not guitar? And I actually do remember very specifically, I thought to myself, like, guitar is cool and like the rock stars play guitar, but everybody plays guitar. I don't want to be like everybody. Let me choose drums. And that became like kind of a funny coincidence later in life when I started to get good enough at drums to actually play with other people. I had a bunch of friends who all played guitar, and a bunch of the kids in school who were in bands all played guitar or bass, and nobody played drums. So everybody was like, oh, you play drums? Do you want to come play with our band or come to this jam session? Because nobody had a drummer, right? I was like a rare animal around those parts, I guess. So I ended up playing a lot with a lot of different people, but never really in bands. It was mostly like I had, I had a friend from this group or a friend from that group or a friend that went to a different school who, I knew from some other coincidence, but I would play with them all the time. We would just get together, and it was most often just me and like a guitar player just playing together. The first time I want to say the first time I actually jumped into kind of a band setting and had, responsibility, like it was not just a complete free for all. We're just having fun and, the garage kind of moment, but like we have a show and we need to be prepared. And these are the songs that you need to know. It was actually for my brother's band in high school that he'd been a member of for years already, but they had booked a show. I want to say it was about 3 or 4 weeks out. The drummer of his band broke his wrist. And again, Obviously he couldn't play, but there weren't a lot of drummers around. And not only that, but I had been, of course, my brother's fan, and I'd been to their shows, and I sort of knew the music. So they approached me, like, as soon as they found out he broke his wrist, they're like, can you fill in for him? And I was like, I don't know, we've got, 3.5 weeks for me to learn your whole set and play it with you. But I took the challenge, and we did. We played probably 6 days a week for those 3.5 weeks leading up to the show, and I really put an effort to learn the songs and learn the changes. And yeah, that was honestly one of maybe a handful of times that I've ever actually played drum set in front of an audience. And that was a really cool show. I don't know if either of you ever had the opportunity to go to Fitzgerald's in Houston. It closed recently and was demolished. But yeah, that show is on the second floor of Fitzgerald's. Place is legendary.
Yeah, I remember your brother telling me a bit about it too, and how like you kind of stepped up for the role. I mean, that's awesome. So after that, I'm not sure if your brother told me more about this, but like after you performed with, I think the band, it was Fugue, right? The
Yeah,
band
yeah, that's right.
Fugue. So did you continue playing with them for a while, or like what happened with
No,
that?
no. After that, it was it was more or less a one and done kind of thing. Like I wasn't trying to supplant the existing drummer, and he was an extremely talented drummer too. And he had just hurt his wrist, so he just needed some time for it to heal up.
Gotcha, gotcha.
Um, yeah. After that, I mean, I honestly I don't remember exactly what year that was. Probably my junior year of high school, so maybe 2004, 2005, somewhere in that neighborhood. After that, I went to Rice. Once again, it was kind of the same story. I met a lot of friends, and as a musician, I sought out other musicians at the other dormitories. I was at Sid Richardson. One of my early friends was at Weiss, so he was right there, and he played bass. He's to this day one of the best bass players I've ever heard. We met up a lot, and actually we did, I don't know if they still do it, but we did 2 or 3 times we did the Battle of the Bands competition at the Weiss College.
I think there's Battle of the Bands recently, but I'm not sure. But I'm from Sid too. But anyways,
Awesome.
yeah,
Death from
that's
above.
so yeah. I mean, um, I guess a random question, like a Sid specific question, I have just popped into my mind is like, I mean, we have a new building now, new Sid. It's old Sid's not really being used anymore. It's kind of like temporary housing for people from Hansen, but like I went down to the basement and there was like there's like a stage and stuff. I don't know if you guys like ever use that at all or
Oh yeah, definitely. We used to definitely like schlep all our equipment in and out of the basement on a regular basis and go play down there. It's a lot of fun. I mean, the acoustics are not great, but they're really fun because it's really echoey in there. It's like a huge resonant chamber. Um, yeah, good times. That was a good basement for playing in.
um so I guess I like to move on to more of I guess your more recent like percussion experiences or I guess maybe not that recent, but you've been with a couple like Japanese like drum groups. I think Onda Koza, right? So can you tell us more about that? Like what was that experience like and how you got into that whole thing?
So when I was still in high school, and I'm 99% sure it was my senior year, I heard about a concert happening at Miller Outdoor Theater. I think it was just from like a newspaper clipping or something that I heard about it. but it was, it was advertised as like Kaminari Taiko of Houston playing the Japanese drum ensemble at Miller Outdoor Theater. It's a free show. I hopped on the chance. I was like, that sounds fun. Let me go check it out. So I went to go see the show, and I was just honestly blown away by just the enormity of the sound. Like it was one of those things, and one of my favorite feelings in the world, I think, is when you're at a concert and you can feel that certain beat hit you in the gut. You can actually feel like your gut move, right? Just an incredible feeling. But the whole concert was like that. It was just high energy, loud, big drums, lots of drama. And I was like, that's pretty cool. I play drums, they play drums. It looks like fun. It's a very physical kind of playing, right? I mean, these are huge drums with huge drumsticks. So I went and did a little research, found out that they offered lessons, like had classes. And I was like, why not? So I went to check one out, had a good time, kind of went back, and I wouldn't say that I was dedicated to it at the time. Like I was just kind of filling time, I guess, and having fun. So like there was no reason for me to stop. Like it was a fun time. Where else do you get to hit drums that are bigger than a person? But so I just kind of kept going, and eventually they kind of were like, we will occasionally promote people out of essentially what is our beginners or like lessons program into our performing group. So they came to me and they said, do you want to join the performing group? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? That sounds fun. And then I want to say it was probably several months, 3 or 4 or 5 months, they were doing that same concert that I had seen again, except this time I was going to be in it. So I had to learn all of the more advanced songs that they had. And honestly, it was really fun. The thrill of being on stage is really kind of indescribable for me. Like it's a weird thing where I don't know if I have the words for it really. It's almost like an out of body experience, or like you're not quite there for it. It's almost meditative in a way. Like you kind of get so absorbed in the moment and the music that you're playing and the stress that your body is going through with taiko in particular, that externalities wash away, and then you come out on the other side and it's just huge adrenaline release, and like, wow, we just played a 2-hour show nonstop, an athletic feat. So it was an extremely rewarding experience for me, and I just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper into it. Eventually, over the years that I played with that group, the older, more experienced members would have moved on. They would have moved to other states or something. But I was still there, and had showed some drive. So I got opportunities to do things like help fundraise for the group or help design a set. And eventually that became like, oh, we need somebody to help us teach the new people. So I would start doing that. And then over time, the group had, a number of different kind of, I guess, ideas on how to improve. And one of them was like, it was more like, let's kind of find some structure on how we want to do this. Maybe it's time to create an intermediate level between the absolute new people and the performing group, so on and so forth. I mean, there were just so many levels of it that I was involved in. I spent so much of my time with these people, and I loved them all very much. And we would travel together. We went, I want to say, as far south, in my time with them, we went as far south as the border of McAllen, Texas. We went as far west as San Francisco to perform with the very first taiko group formed in America, the San Francisco Taiko Dojo. We went as far east as Tennessee and Mississippi. Played shows basically all over, the South and Southeast US. New Orleans was a regular stop for us. We traveled a lot, played a lot, and, you know, I didn't get paid for it, but I did it because I loved it. But yeah, I mean, I honestly, like, by the time I was graduating from Rice, I was already like in a position where I was writing songs, helping to organize and arrange pieces for new performances, helping train the new members, helping to essentially arrange our performing group's practice schedule. Because I mean, it wasn't necessarily that I was a better drummer than anyone else in the group, but I had more experience with the formal methods of playing. Like, not a lot of people there would, at the very beginning, not a lot of members there would have been able to say, like, I know what a paradiddle is, let's practice paradiddles, right? Paradiddle just being another percussion rudiment. So because I knew those things, because I'd had enough formal training to know those things, I ended up in a position where I was also helping to, like, kind of try and move the group forward together and make us all better, so that our performances could be tighter and, you know, more impactful, I think, for the audiences. So yeah, I mean, it was a huge part of my life. Like, without a doubt, it was, in a lot of ways, it distracted me from my time at Rice, from my studies, from, you know, career goals when I was young, when I was 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever. It was like, I don't want to think about what I'm going to do after I graduate college, because I'm having a lot of fun playing taiko now. Through that journey, I obviously learned that there's several groups in Japan that are well known, that are professionals, that are very hardcore. The first one, and probably biggest, maybe now, but maybe even now, but definitely at the time, the biggest was a group called Kodo. And I looked them up, found out they had, you know, an apprenticeship program where they'll train you for 9 months or a year or something at your own dime. And then if you're good enough, you can join the performing group. Then with them, you get to go tour the whole world and put on these, like, big, fantastic shows in the world's most famous concert halls. And I said, that is what I want to do. I want to go be a member of this group. So I, in a lot of ways, kind of half-heartedly devoted myself to it. And I say half-heartedly because I don't know how much I ever really meant it, to go join them specifically. I think maybe there was a little fear in the idea of leaving the country and going to join, you know, this really hardcore group that, you know, they live together, they eat together, they work 7 days a week together, they exercise together, they practice. It's literally 24/7 for a year straight with a whole bunch of people I don't know, speaking a language I don't know, in a country I've never been to. Definitely a scary prospect. But I guess I kind of, at that point, I sort of let it drop, and I graduated from Rice. I was still playing with Kaminari in Houston. I was working an odd job at one of the Rice U labs, just to, you know, support myself, with no real prospects. Like, I hadn't really put any serious effort or thought into what to do and how to make a living. And I was still just super, you know, hyper focused on this taiko group. And then out of nowhere, probably about 1.5 years after I graduated, I got an email from a Japanese American guy who was living with another group called Ondakoza in Japan. They coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, they were the father group of Kodo. So it was originally just Ondakoza, and they were formed back in the mid-'60s. And then at some point, I think in the 70s or early 80s or something, Kodo actually split off from Ondakoza. A handful of members was basically like, we think we can do things differently and better, so we're going to take all the drums and go do our own group. And so they went off and did that. Ondakoza, though, did not, you know, dissolve. They kind of kept going and doing their own thing, sticking to what Ondakoza teaches and believes is the you know, their ideal way of performing taiko. So I got an email from a guy who was with this group, who is a Japanese American, like I said, and he was basically like calling all interested parties in American taiko groups, where we would love to have you guys come out and see what we're about and see if you're interested in joining our apprenticeship program. And I guess it's one of those things. It's just like kind of crazy that it happened after it was, after I had spent so long daydreaming about an opportunity like that. It finally just kind of landed in my lap, completely unexpected. So I reached out to him, and we corresponded by email for a few weeks. I sent over an application, an essay, and they accepted me into the group. So I immediately started making plans to pick up everything and go move to Japan to be with them. So I did, actually. That's exactly what I did. Just kind of left town to go join this group in Japan. They were extremely hardcore, and I not having ever been in the original group, or the group that I had originally wanted to be in, Kodo, I can't tell you how they compare, but I would venture a guess that Endokoza is more hardcore. They had a very kind of austere way of living. I mean, it was not just a musical performing group, right? Like, it was, the founder of the group had an idea about how people can respect the world around them in a more meaningful way. So they had a lot of ideas about language and about posture, lifestyle, things to, I guess, assuage somebody from living kind of a rude or too materialistic life. They were super hardcore. I mean, it was literally a group that is known for running. That's like their, I don't want to call it a gimmick, but I can't think of another word, but they run and they drum, right? And one of their foundational principles was literally that running and drumming are the same. They called it, I think it was a sogakuron, but it was essentially that they're not indistinguishable, that physical training, running, the mental stress and fortitude that you need to be able to do long distance running is not different than the fortitude you need to be able to play these drums in a meaningful and respectful way. So, for example, they in the early 90s, I think, then this was probably the peak of their career thus far. They did a running tour of the United States. They literally landed, I think, in like New York, somewhere in the Northeast, played a show, and then started running the perimeter of the US. And I'm not even kidding, the perimeter of the US. They ran from town to town, had their equipment, driven in some kind of truck behind them, but they ran all over the United States, all the way south and then west through the desert, all the way up the west coast, and then back across the Canadian-US border. They ended in Boston, where the members all ran the Boston Marathon, and then at the finish line played a 2-hour show, like right after running a marathon. So you can imagine the training regimen for this group was pretty intense. I mean, we ran twice a day most days. It would be like you have your morning 6-mile run and then your afternoon variety run. It went from anywhere from like sprints or staircase practice to this is the day we run 12 miles. So it was extremely intense. There weren't a whole lot of days off. I was 2,000, I don't know how far away Japan is from Houston, 2,000 miles away from everyone I knew, like all my friends, all my family. I was that far away from the food I loved eating, Mexican food and Cajun food, and just all these things that were lacking in that lifestyle. And I guess at the end of the day, maybe I'm too materialistic too materialistic to really adhere to their ideals. So I decided after a year, right around the time my visa was up for renewal, I was like, it's either renew the visa, stay for a year, or go back to the States and see where I can pick up my life there. Um, Obviously, I chose that and came back to Houston. I did go back to Kaminari after that. I played with them probably for another year and a half before I finally called it quits there as well.
Mhm. Wow, that's a lot. I think, yeah, like especially that how that initial exposure in high school sparked this years long journey that you even went to Japan and came back and did it for a while. That's yeah, very awesome. I think now I'll pass it to Ian. He's gonna ask some questions about kind of your education, career, and some of your current musical endeavors.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question I wanted to ask was, so you went to Rice and you studied economics, but you said you didn't really have, like in your bio, you didn't really have your heart in pursuing that field. So do you ever consider like exploring other majors or like just diving into anything else at Rice, or either both academically and non-academically?
Yeah, so I think I don't know again if it's a me thing. I would guess that it probably is, but I think when I was 18 or however old I was, matriculating into Rice, I was too young to be asked the question, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? I actually started out for no particular reason other than that I enjoyed and was good at physics in high school. I started out as a mechie. So my first year at Rice, I spent fulfilling core curriculum for mechanical engineering. I was doing physics, I guess the calculus classes, statistics classes, things like that. And I honestly, Rice academically, Rice was, and I know that I'm not alone in this. Rice was kind of a shock for me. Like I was an extremely good student in high school. I made good grades. I was strong in the sciences and maths. And then I got to Rice, and that idea that I was good at science and math got completely obliterated by the first semester. So I suddenly was faced with this question, like, am I actually good at physics? Do I actually like calculus? Like, am I actually good at these things? Or or I guess was I studying them in a completely inaccurate setting, I guess is the best way to phrase it. So yeah, mechanical engineering was kind of a slap in the face, and I took some long and hard looks at who I perceived myself as and what I thought my strengths were. Mechanical engineering basically didn't align with that. So I decided, like let me look for other fields that interest me. And I think economics really stood out because I am fascinated and still am fascinated by specifically the sociological side of economics. The hard data never really interested me that much. I was not great at statistics, not great at predicting the futures on oil reserves in the Texas plains or anything of that nature. Like I was interested in how people's wants and desires and shifting, and how that can shift through a population and have ripple effects throughout an economy, which can multiply across various economies or a world economy. Those like broad strokes, sweeping questions were the things that really interested me. And I thought that, that was what I wanted to learn about. And it seemed to me to be a good idea because it is, at the end of the day, still a practical career path. To study economics, there's still a lot of professional opportunities that come from it. So I thought, this is good. It'll be a good balance of both worlds. And quite frankly, a huge benefit of that to me was that the graduation hour requirements went from, I want to say like 126 or 130 hours down to, I don't know, 40. So what that did for me was give me a lot of time to choose classes in other departments, elective classes that really were material that interested me a lot. So I took, anthropology classes, I took religious studies classes, I took literature classes, and I don't regret it. Those things were extremely meaningful to me. Maybe not a wise choice when it comes to finding a job after school, but extremely meaningful and enriching for me. And again, I kind of, I guess, I potentially was still too young to answer the question, what do you want to do with the rest of your life, when I was graduating from Rice? Because the easy first answer was, I want to play taiko. I want to go, make this my entire existence. I want to live and breathe every second this. So that more than anything was the reason I didn't necessarily have my heart in a career in economics. But the actual reality is that I sort of tried. I did try a couple of times to get internships in New York for some of the banks. I did try to, throw my application into the running for certain jobs at oil companies in Houston. But I never really pursued it. I did not go the extra mile to try and land the gig. I wasn't, it just really wasn't for me. I think at the end of the day, even though I had made those choices to study that for the reasons that I had chosen to study that, it did not necessarily align with who I think I am and what my goals in life were. So I ended up not really pursuing that as a field either.
So it's clear that you had a lot of experiences, like different experiences during college. So do you think they kind of apply today as well? Like, did they play a part in your life still today, or was that like kind of experience in the past and like you've moved on from that?
No, I think they definitely play a huge role in where I am now, and a lot of that is I think, a state of mind. Um, I've always been a big believer in the benefits of being a well-rounded person, of being a worldly person, of being a thoughtful person. And I think that if I had really buckled down and focused on a very singular thing, like, I'm going to be a mechanical engineer. After I graduate, I'm going to go work for, I don't know, Lockheed. If I knew that and I focused so strongly on that path, I think that I wouldn't necessarily have the worldview that I have today. A lot of that being developed by things like spending a lot of time outside of class playing taiko. The group, and I guess I didn't really go into detail on the group, but like, the group in Houston was from all walks of life. There were people that were, I joined when I was like 17 or 18, so I was very young at the time. Probably at the time the youngest person in the group, but by the time I left, I was in the middle range. There were people who were teens joining. There were people who were, I think we were teaching children's classes. So when I would go to the studio, there were, kids running around. And at the other end of the spectrum, there were retirees looking for something to spend their, retired days doing. These guys, and, these people came from a huge number of backgrounds, culturally, ethnically, religiously, economically. Some of these guys were super high-powered managers at General Electric, and then others were jobless hippies that made candles and sold them at like farmers markets. All wonderful people, and I love them a lot, and they all had such different perspectives on life. And me being able to spend so much time with them and kind of understand where they're coming from, I think made a huge impact on how I perceive the world today. on top of that, again, I know I touched on the, the different course load requirements from being like a mechanical engineer versus being an economics major. The fact that I got to choose a lot of the electives that I did, that I got to learn about anthropology or history or religion. Some of my favorite classes there I took with, oh man, I'm blanking on names. I've not been able to remember a single name today, but I would not be surprised if she still teaches at Rice. And I can only remember her first name. It was Dr. Ann something, but she's in the religions department. She teaches essentially all their classes on Buddhism. So I took probably 3 or 4 of her classes. I took classes on, I guess, metaphysics, touching on things like psychology. I took classes on Islam and the history of Islam and the theology of it. Those things like, you don't necessarily, those things don't necessarily get taught to you in your day-to-day life, right? And like you can watch YouTube or you can, talk to your friends, and some of us are lucky enough to be surrounded by people from a lot of different backgrounds. But, in most people's cases, I would say that kind of knowledge you have to really seek out. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that. I think, like I said, I don't regret the choices I made. I mean, I know that on paper it may look like I did not end up graduating from Rice and pursuing, careers in that path. I mean, it's more than paper. It's definitely true, but I don't regret a second of it. I think all those experiences were formative, and I honestly count myself, like I've been saying, I really count myself lucky to have had them.
So I want to move on to the careers that you've had. So you mentioned in your bio that you've had a lot of experience in the culinary industry. So you worked in like a high-end kitchen and worked as a sous chef for a while, and then was an executive chef, a Japanese restaurant. So can you tell us a little bit more about this phase of your life while you're cooking professionally?
Yeah, so more or less when I got back from Japan, I came back and picked up almost exactly where I left off. I was a graduate from Rice and did not have a career path. So I was, fairly independently minded at the time. I didn't necessarily want to go back to my parents and say, hey guys, I need a place to stay and can I borrow some money? So I was more or less like, I don't want to do that to them, and I want to be, I really want to do for myself. So I said, I'm gonna find a job. My girlfriend at the time was working as a server. I think she was a server at the time. It's been so long, but she helped me get into the door at the restaurant she was currently working at. And yeah, I mean, again, everybody I'm sure says this about the experiences they've had, but that restaurant and a couple of the subsequent restaurants I worked at were, again, extremely formative. Being able to meet the people that I met there and have those experiences has just meant the world to me. So working at that restaurant, I started doing entry-level restaurant stuff. It was honestly really mundane work. I was working as a bar back, and if you don't know what they do, they essentially make sure that the liquor bottles are not empty. They make sure that there's still ice in the ice bins at the bar. They make sure that the guests have their water refilled, things like that. But not a whole lot of direct interaction with customers. They clean at the end of the night. Lots and lots of cleaning is what restaurants are generally about. But from there, I was kind of like, I don't want to say aimless, but kind of aimless. Like I didn't necessarily know what my next moves were. I was just living my life, meeting people, making friends, hanging out with them. So I kind of just kept working there for a while. Started picking up some shifts in the kitchen here and there. Made really good friends with one of the chefs at that restaurant. eventually stopped working in the kitchen because an opportunity came up for me to go bartend, and bartenders tended to make a lot more money and have more prestige than cooks or barbacks. So I took that opportunity, worked there for a while, but I don't think I'm necessarily cut out for customer interaction. I'm not the friendliest or nicest person at all times. I think I have a tendency to kind of wear my heart on my sleeve, as they say. So if somebody is rude, or if somebody seems like they deserve it, I generally am not the kind of person to hesitate in showing how I feel about it. So it wasn't exactly suited for me. So I kind of started thinking, I don't know what to do now. I was still playing with Kaminari at the time. I had a couple of gigs and, here and there playing for music, which was really fun. And I think I would have really liked to pursue it, but didn't necessarily give it the attention it deserved at the time. So I started to feel a little bit stuck, a little bit like, if I'm going to work in restaurants, if this is my career path, let me do everything I can to make a good career path out of it, to make an honorable and a something that I could be proud of, I guess, a prideful career path. So I decided, I actually really did enjoy cooking, and cooking was a thing that I loved since I was a kid. I definitely never saw myself going into it as a career, but it was always something I enjoyed doing. Would help my mom around the kitchen when I was a child a lot. So I said, let me try this cooking thing. So I started talking to some friends. One of them had recently left that restaurant to go work at another, which was one of the top kitchens, I want to say, in the city. I'm sure a lot of people would disagree with me, but like in terms of the skill level expected of the people who worked on the staff there, I would say it was one of the top kitchens. And I essentially cold called them. I went to their door after my shift was over one night and kind of was just like, hey, I would like to, I would like to work for you guys. What can I do? And I didn't even know what it was at the time, but they essentially said, you can stage for us. And staging is like interning, except brutal, like extremely brutal. But yeah, so I staged for them. So essentially what that meant was, after my shift, on my off days, whenever basically I had time and the willpower, I would go work for them for free in their kitchen, again, doing mostly cleaning and some prep work. And being that I was somebody without a culinary school degree, without any background in cooking, they asked me to do that for around 2 months before they finally were like, you know what, you've been here for 2 months and you haven't quit yet. So how about we give you a shot? So they did give me a shot. And yeah, it was honestly, I want to say it was the single hardest thing I've ever had to do, cutting my teeth in that kitchen. It was extremely brutal. And like, I know I talked to you guys about what the regimen was like when I was in Japan. This was like soul crushingly brutal. It was very, very hard work, very long hours. And it's really hard to describe. Kitchens are a special place. Your coworkers are unlike any coworkers you'll ever have anywhere else, or probably ever again. We worked extremely hard in that kitchen. I worked with some extremely talented people, and in my opinion, we made the city's best food at the time. It was incredible stuff. I mean, we're talking like I forget the name. I think it was maybe the Mercury Orchestra. I forget exactly the name, but I think it's a group called the Mercury Orchestra. we would do events. And so one of them was this Mercury Orchestra came, and essentially they're like, we're going to play this series of our original music. And our chef got together with their artistic director and was like, okay, and we're going to make dishes that accompany the music. So we designed a whole tasting menu. I think it was like 12 or 13 or 14 dishes or something that were all each specifically designed to go with a specific piece that this orchestra was playing. And then, you know, a bunch of Houston's elites would come in and pay probably an ungodly amount of money for a seat at the table. But that was, you know, that was not unusual. So it was that caliber of work that was expected from us. And yeah, it was an incredible time. But ultimately, I think, I don't know the details, but ultimately the restaurant closed. I think the owner, the actual owner, who is not the chef, decided to pull the plug on it financially, or maybe the lease was up. I really don't know the details. By that time I had made sous chef, so I was, you know, I felt pretty proud of that, being sous chef at, you know, at least what I thought was one of the best kitchens in the city, if not the best kitchen in the city. But the restaurant closed, so I was kind of out again. But the truth is that for a lot of that time, like I said, it was brutal work. And I mean, I was working, you know, pretty, not uncommonly, like 6 days a week. The minimum shift was probably usually like 12 hours, 10, 12 hours. The long days it would get up to, you know, 16, 15, 16, 17, somewhere around there. I was burnt out. I was extremely tired. I had started to kind of say to myself, like, I don't think I can do this forever. I don't know how anyone does. I don't know how anyone past 40 can, you know, make a career doing this. And so I had explored a few different options. There were, like, I knew there were paths forward in the culinary industry. Like, there are jobs like in research kitchens. There are jobs in academies where you can, you know, teach cooking classes, or you can go teach cooking classes at local public school districts. There are considerably less stressful restaurants or kitchens you can work in. But, you know, I think at that point, like, I was burnt out to the point where I kind of thought to myself, like, I just get me as far away from it as possible. So I had started kind of at that point already exploring my previous interests in technology, and specifically in coding. Because, you know, when I was in school, I had to learn in computer classes, learn some coding. Like, we worked with MATLAB at Rice. I worked in C# before, C++, Java, HTML, like the lower level or basic, the more basic level ones, at least, had some exposure to, and I always remembered enjoying it. So I started saying, like, I can do this. Like, I'm gonna pursue this as a career. But time to do that is really difficult when you're working, you know, 12+ hour days, 5 or 6 days a week. So after the restaurant closed, one of the former chefs, the chef de cuisine, who was my direct manager, he'd already landed a new job at another kitchen. So he's like, hey, we actually need some help. Do you want to come work with me? And I said, I decided essentially to start approaching that as a career path differently. At that point, I said, I'll give you a month. I'll work with you for a month and no more. And I'm firm on that. So I did exactly that. I went and worked for him for a month. And after a month, I left, and he was like, are you sure you won't stay? And I said, I can't stay here for too long. Yeah, I didn't say that to him, but in my head, I was like, the longer I stay here, the more permanent it gets, and the less likely I am to find a way to realign my goals. So that started a path of me just kind of hopping between odd jobs. I literally would pick up shifts at places just for like a night or 2 nights. I ended up getting something pretty steady at a ramen restaurant. And I worked there for a while, like a pretty long while, several months at least. And at that time, I was like, it was there was some slower days, and I definitely was under a lot less pressure. The days were shorter. I was working a day shift instead of night shift. My responsibilities were a lot lighter, so I spent a lot of time working on kind of building myself up for a different career path. And then out of the blue, a friend of mine, he calls me and he says, are you busy Saturday? I'm like, no, actually, I have Saturday off. What's up? And he's like, I want to show you something. So he picks me up from my apartment Saturday morning, and he drives me to this empty building. And he was like, what do you think? And I'm like, what are we looking at? He says, it's going to be my restaurant. And I said, that's awesome, dude. Like, congratulations. I'm happy for you. So, I played pro bono consultant and like, so like these, this is a great thing. This is a great location, but you could rearrange the dining room this way or rearrange the kitchen this way, or, it'd be really cool if you set up, the host, the greeter stand like right here, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of the morning, he was kind of like, so how about it? And I'm like, how about what? And he's like, you didn't think I drove you out here just to tell me how to lay out the restaurant? And I was like, oh, actually, I kind of thought you did. He's like, no, I want you to be the executive chef. And honestly, like, it was a huge offer, but pretty instantly I was starting to have second thoughts. Again, the permanence aspect of it, right? I knew to myself, like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. This guy, I know him, I trust him. He's going to make a great restaurant here. I can be a part of that and it'll be semi-permanent, or I can say no and, keep working my day shift at the ramen restaurant while trying to figure out how to get out of restaurants. At the end of the day, I decided that you can't turn away an opportunity like that. I mean, it honestly, to me, in a lot of ways, it was a parallel to the time I got an email about a drum group in Japan that was bringing on apprentices. It doesn't happen, right? Like, it doesn't happen. Nobody I knew who worked in restaurants basically had ever had somebody come up to them and say, like, I have funding, I have an idea, and I want you to be my executive chef. So I was like, I can't say no to that. So I went with him, and we spent the next, I want to say 4 or 5 months, the two of us and his spouse, just renovating the restaurant, doing R&D, prepping things, cleaning out the kitchen, because the kitchen had been more or less abandoned before. Like, we were still finding bits of product left over from the last restaurant. So we spent the next several months just cleaning, renovating, preparing, going through the motions of getting licensing, inspections, like all the good stuff that goes into opening a restaurant. And honestly, those days were some of my favorite memories, I think, of working in restaurants, because it really was a special time when you don't have a customer yet that you have to appease, that you have to make happy, and that has to provide you income to keep the business afloat. You don't have necessarily, you're not on your feet in a hot kitchen for 16 hours, but you are on your feet in a kitchen for 8 hours saying, like, here's this cool idea for a dish that I had, and let me see if I can execute it. Let me see if I can plate it to make it look attractive, and let's taste it to see if it actually is good. And so being able to work with somebody who has a similar palate, we shared a lot of the same cuisine interests when it comes to, like, the idea of what Japanese food can be like in a city like Houston. We shared a lot of the same ideas, right? So it was an awesome way for me to, I think, flex a creative muscle that I hadn't really been flexing a lot lately. Like I said, I'd already left the taiko group. At the time, I was still playing drums, but definitely not as seriously as I had in the past. So it was a great way for me to at least try to be an artist about something. So that was awesome. Eventually, the restaurant opened. We started off with a bang. It was extremely busy. Things were going actually pretty well for a very long time, but there ended up being a divergence, I think, of not only our artistic ideas or our tastes about food. But ultimately, the owner and I ended up kind of diverging on a lot of ideas about what the restaurant meant and where it could go in the future. Um, and by that time, I was once again burnt out, as I'm sure he was, and you know, anyone who has to go work like that in a kitchen. But yeah, I was working 6 days a week, again, 12-hour like minimum days for that entire stretch. It was about a year. It was just exhausting, completely exhausting, and I was definitely burnout. So when the right moment came for me to exit, I just kind of did. I mean, it wasn't I didn't just like walk out on a shift or anything, but you know, we parted ways. And so I was once again found myself in a position of like, what do I do next? Like, I still have to make money. I've tried at this point professional musicianship. I've tried being a research assistant in a lab, and I've tried working in restaurants as a chef, and none of them really ended up sitting very well with me. But then, you know, it came back to me. I was like, you know, maybe I'm not great at being a software engineer, not a great coder, but tech still does interest me. So I studied up a little bit on that and started applying, and got a job in IT. One of the common things I think people ask, because I don't necessarily usually tell everybody my life story. It's a lot to lay on somebody, but one of the things they usually ask is, you know, how long have you been in IT? And when I tell them like 4 years, they're like, oh, wow, like, where, you know, what did you do before this? And so I kind of give them the brief version of my life story. And their question is usually like, why IT? Like, why get into IT? It sounds like you had, you know, a creative and colorful career before this. And the actual answer is something that I think about all the time, is that when I was kids and me and my brother were making music together, my dad had an old reel-to-reel recording device that we used to use, completely analog. This was before digital recording was widespread, before bedroom, you know, recording studios were a thing. So eventually we moved off that device and onto something digital, onto something that actually had, you know, digital tracks. But we had a couple of occasions over, you know, a few years where a lot of that data went missing or got corrupted, or we couldn't retrieve it for this, that, or the other reason. And for me, it was always about problem solving. So the question was, how can we keep this data secure and intact, right? And in a modern world, that ended up being an IT solution. And then, you know, more things come into being, like how can we use a digital audio workstation to, you know, make the music mix better. Again, an IT solution. How can we make this digital audio workstation something we can share? Again, an IT solution. And then over time, it morphed into, like, look, there's all this great new technology coming out. There's these cloud hosting services. How can we do that? And my question started being like, how can we do that but not use Google or not use Microsoft? How can we do it and have the security of knowing that, you know, we have the equipment, that the physical disks containing the data are something that one of us is in possession of? You know, obviously just a USB external drive is not necessarily a good solution. So you start exploring other solutions. And ultimately what I'm driving at is that a lot of what I learned about and a lot of my interest in IT grew from problem solving how to make music a more effective and not how to make music more effective, right? But how to make our processes for making and saving our music more effective and safer. And it really did ended up teaching me enough that I was able to get that first job in IT.
So since we're running a little bit low on time, I would like to move on to like the last couple of questions. So I want to ask about like your current musical endeavors. For example, in your bio, you said like you worked with like indie labels like Scorch One Records. So like I want to ask what kind of music have you been producing and like sort of expand on that, I guess.
Sorry, can you repeat the last part of that question?
Just like expand on like your experiences and what kind of music you're making currently.
Yeah, so I guess I don't remember if I mentioned it in our emails, but I have since moved to New York, so I'm now like very far away from Houston. So it's different here, and there's a lot of things that are different about New York. One of them is that it's been challenging to carry my drum set around and to have places to play it. I'm lucky enough right now to live in an apartment that has a kind of a sub basement area that is, encased in concrete basically. So it's pretty quiet down there. At least I don't think I'm irritating the neighbors a lot. If I am, they haven't mentioned it yet. Yeah, so I still play drums. A large part of that is a project that my brother and I had started way back when I was still at Rice, circa like 2009 probably. So we started collaborating back then, essentially with the mission of like let's make the music that we want to hear that nobody else is making it, because we had a variety of different musical tastes, and even he and I like very different kinds of music generally. But we do also agree on a lot of stuff. So it's how can we, what do we do to make music that we like, more or less. So I still work with him on that project, not as much these days as he would like, and definitely not as much as I would like. Back when we started it, I used to contribute a lot more to like composition. These days, the composition is really coming from him more than anyone. I think he's kind of a genius when it comes to that. But what it is mostly these days is he'll come to me and he'll say, I have this idea for a song, or I have this track that is 60% or 90% finished. It really needs your drums to it. And so more or less all I do now is track drums. And a lot of the time what that ends up being is still a collaborative effort, and that when I will send back anything to him, he often listens to it, and again, in his genius of creating something, he's like, I think it would sound really cool if, your drums made me think that it would be super cool if the song goes this way instead. So he kind of rearranges or rewrites or remixes different parts of the song, and occasionally that means it needs new or more or different drums. So we'll go back and forth sometimes on it. I think in a lot of ways, I regret not being able to focus more on the melodic instruments that I played when I was a child, cello and piano, because playing drums by yourself, it is very fun and it is very cathartic, but there is an element of it that I've started missing more and more the older I've gotten, which is, it gets, I guess, it gets kind of boring, I guess, is really the best word, to just play drums by yourself for hours on end. Practicing is one thing, but like you can't, it's extremely difficult to sit down and play a song on drums, you know what I mean, and actually get anything out of it. So that being said, I have recently-ish, in the last, I want to say 2 years, I've started trying to teach myself a melodic instrument again, so that I can have the best of both worlds, so that I can have the satisfaction of being able to sit down and play a song, and it was an actual song, not just me, playing rudiments on a snare drum for an hour. I've been playing guitar. Not good yet. I'm hoping that one day it'll be good enough that I can actually start writing songs and potentially even contributing back to this project that my brother and I have been working on for so long. I mentioned moving to New York, and I'm sorry, this has been a really long-winded series of answers from me. But I mentioned New York specifically because Houston has a fantastic music scene. Like it's one of the things that I think it's kind of underrated, and mostly because I think it's pretty underground. Like I went to see a jazz artist once in Houston, and they more or less came on stage and they said, we don't come to Houston very often, but I don't really know why. We should, because if you go anywhere else in the country where jazz is big, and you go to any quartet playing at any club, at least one of the four people on stage is from Houston. And I was like, that really stuck with me because it does speak a lot to the traditions, the roots that music has in Houston, what Houston is inherently an extremely musical city, but it's not exactly there on the surface. I think you kind of have to dig. A lot of major acts kind of just skip over Houston. You know, they'll go to San Antonio or Dallas or Austin and not go to Houston. I couldn't exactly tell you why, because there's a ton of talent, a ton of venues, and honestly a huge scene. It was a big part of my high school and college, free time was spent going out to see shows. But one of the things that I think is really cool about New York is that even though those things were all true for me in Houston, there's so much music here. It's just like spilling out onto the street. It's like when you think of what, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's still true in New Orleans, but you literally can walk down the street and you'll hear three different bands playing out of the different bars and clubs, in a neighborhood. And I just think that's really cool. And it's been an inspiration for me to really put more effort into music because I've been so focused on my IT career lately. I think that I've been letting it slide a little bit.
Yeah, I think that will be all the questions. Well, we're kind of running low on time, so.
Yeah, I apologize.
No worries. I was talking a lot. I think it might be a family trait.
I'm sorry.
I was talking a lot. I think it might be a family trait.
No, I don't think so. I mean, we have like more questions, but for the sake of time and to be respectful for your evening, we can close now, and then if you'd like, we can always do like a part 2 interview or something like that. But I guess
sure.
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm definitely open to it, but really, I would, you tell me, I guess, if it's something, if there are things you would like to address, like I'm more than happy to meet again, or if you don't think a meeting is necessary, you can always email me, and I'm happy to answer what I can over a message.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, it was very interesting to hear, I mean, all your stories. I think you have a very unique kind of winding path through many fields, which is very interesting and very inspiring to hear about, I think, especially for people who are interested like in a lot of things and who like to amass like all sorts of diverse experiences on their journey. So I guess before we close, do you have anything else that you'd like to share maybe that perhaps we didn't cover, or any last words?
No, not really that I can think of. I really appreciate you guys' time tonight and for reaching out to me.
Yeah,
it is nice. I mean, it's nice to it's nice, I guess, to like honestly have to take the time and reflect on what the journey has been so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I mean, thanks so much for, taking the time out of your day again. And, spending so much time to talk with us about all these things. And I'm sure, a lot of people or whoever views this will be inspired. As we have.
I hope so. Yeah. Well, thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Ian. If you guys, again, if you have anything else, any other questions you have from there, anything at all, just let me know.